Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody, my name is Ben Adelberg.
And I'm Emma Strutt.
And welcome to episode 11 for the year. Now, thank you so much to all our listeners so far. Please do remember to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Now, today's chat may seem to digress a little from our usual topics, but I think you'll very quickly realize that it's all interconnected with our need for consumption and the impact it has on our planet, and therefore environmental wellness. So, Emma, let's roll.
Yeah, so today we have Dr. Rebecca Van Amber joining us. She's a senior lecturer in fashion and textiles at RMIT University in Melbourne. Previously, she was part of the award-winning team at Deakin University that developed an innovative way of colouring jeans which greatly reduced water and energy use. Rebecca is passionate about textile and apparel sustainability, research and development, and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the conversation today. And Ben, as you said, for our regular listeners, this topic might at first seem a little bit left of centre, but fashion's environmental impact is quite significant and should be an important consideration for anyone that's interested in reducing their environmental footprint and making sustainable choices. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation today, and I hope our listeners are too. Dr. Van Amber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rebecca, so we have a lot we're keen to dive into, but let's first start with a little bit about your story and your interest in fashion and, in particular, textiles.
So I think I've kind of had a really long and varied career. I've always been really interested in textiles and fabrics and fashion and sewing. Dare I say sewing? I sort of hate to say sewing because it's sort of a bit of a... it sounds a bit
old,
crafty, but yeah, it sounds a bit old. But
I think it's pretty on trend these days.
Yeah, I'm originally from Minnesota in the United States, and we are very much sort of, it's a lot of people do engage in craft, and so you learn a lot of people learn how to sew from a really young age, and my mom taught me to sew, and I always loved it. And then I sort of went to university and realized that you could actually do this as a career, and so I, studied. It was called clothing design in Minnesota back then, but kind of like I studied fashion design at university and was always really interested in the environment and sustainability. But when I went to university, those sorts of conversations around sustainability and fashion were just not happening. So like I sort of did a collection out of organic cotton back then, which was about the only thing you could find really. And then I worked for a couple of years in the industry and sort of realized that I sort of didn't really want my career to kind of go in that direction. I was working as a tech designer. So the tech designer is someone who is really in charge of the fit of the garments. And so I was doing a lot of sizing and I was doing a lot of measuring of garments and sort of entering measurements into Excel, and which was a wonderful experience, a great experience in terms of working in the industry, but not something that I saw myself wanting to do for the rest of my life. So I really kind of totally went off center here and decided to do my master's in New Zealand. So
I missed that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So at the age of 23, I moved to New Zealand and studied clothing and textile science at the University of Otago to really kind of take my career in a bit of a different direction from where it had been. And so I ended up living in Dunedin for 9 years. So I did a master's and a PhD and my first postdoc down at the University of Otago, really finding that was kind of my passion, was really textile science, and something that I didn't realize you could really do, and kind of blended my love of textiles and fabrics with science, and starting to pursue a little bit in terms of environmental impacts and sort of research, because I've always loved science, but I've also loved fashion, and these sorts of things I think for a lot of people don't seem to kind of go together very well, but somehow I feel like I finally have kind of melded all of my interests together into a career.
When you say there hasn't been a lot out there in terms of research, the impacts of textiles on the environment, when I think back, the only documentary I've ever seen maybe there's been another one, but the only one was a documentary years ago on the impact of the manufacture of jeans, and the colouring and all the pollutants that end up in the rivers. But that's pretty much it. But let's take a stock take of the bigger picture here. So with the recent release of the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy, it's brought to light a lot of issues, including the plastic problem in our oceans. So should we start there before we delve into the world of textiles and what they mean and all that? The impact of plastic in our oceans, where that's at, and how textiles is contributing to that.
And I must apologize, I haven't actually seen Seaspiracy yet, but it's on my list of things to watch. I know it's only just come out, and I was sort of doing a bit of traveling over the Easter holidays and things, so it's definitely on my list. But yes, especially last year I watched The Story of Plastic. That was another great documentary. And that really opened my eyes as well. But certainly, I think especially in Australia, there's a pretty good understanding of the fact that microfibres and microplastics are a real problem in the ocean. You think of Australia, a lot of the research into microplastics, I think, started here. I think it started by a researcher, and I must apologize to the researcher whose name I can't remember. I think they're in New South Wales that sort of started pioneering some of that research into microplastics. And certainly, I think Australians as well are because so many people live so close to the ocean, I think that it's something, they see that as a very valuable resource. They have a really strong connection with the ocean. And so I think it kind of makes sense that some of that research started here in Australia. But certainly the effect of microplastics, they're just sort of everywhere now. They're in the atmosphere, they're in the Arctic, they're in the ocean, there's nowhere on the planet now where there aren't microplastics of some sort. When you start to kind of go down the rabbit hole of how bad is this problem, they're everywhere. They're in us. I think, and I don't want to repeat the statistics, I don't remember exactly where it's come from, but, we as human beings consume, I think it was estimated to be like a credit card's worth of plastic every year. It's in our bodies, it's everywhere. And that is kind of scary to think about. And I must, as a scientist, I'm like, I don't remember exactly where that original source was, and I don't want to be sort of contributing to the false knowledge or citing stats that aren't true. But there's a certain percentage of plastic that we ingest every year as and humans.
That'll vary based on how it's ingested. So if someone consumes more fish or seafood, that could likely be higher, and then potentially also depending where you live, and then where the water is contaminated or so that would vary, of course. So it could be worse for some.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. It would definitely vary from person to person depending on your diet.
Yeah, but a surprising chunk of the microplastics in our oceans are actually from clothes, aren't they? So Rebecca, could you talk us through the link between the clothes we buy and wash and the plastic pollution that ends up in our waterways?
Absolutely. It's very interesting because working in sort of fashion and sustainability, a lot of people are very concerned about, I think, the energy and resources that are going into textiles and fashion when they're made. But when you actually look at a life cycle analysis of a garment or piece of clothing, most of the energy and resources are used during its use or the time that we use it. And mostly that has to do with laundering and washing. So the energy and the water that's used in a garment's life cycle are generally consumed mostly during the time of its use when it's being washed. And so if you think about, how many times you wash your clothing, certainly the wastewater treatment facilities are not set up to capture microplastics. So all of the microplastics that are sort of coming out of your clothing into your laundry, into your washing machine, are then just going straight into waterways. And even though they're going through wastewater treatment facilities, those facilities aren't set up to capture microplastics. And because they're microplastics, they're very, very small. They're not really being caught, and they're just sort of just going out into wherever the water and the effluent is being discharged to, the treated water after it's gone through the wastewater treatment.
So why is it actually coming off the garments? Is it something to do with the temperature of the water that we wash it in, or, the detergent we use, or is it the actual, different types of fibres that the garments are made out of?
It actually really has to come down to when you're washing your clothing, you're putting it through basically an agitation process. Obviously, most people are using sort of a front loader or a top loader. So the way that your clothing is being washed is it's being agitated in the washing machine. So you've got water and you've got your detergent, but then you've got that mechanical action of, say, the tumbling, if it's a front loader, or the sort of center, I don't know what's called, the centerpiece in sort of an upright top loading washing machine has that sort of central agitator. And so that's actually the way that your clothes are becoming clean, is that mechanical action. And so the mechanical action in the washing machine is also causing damage to the clothing. So that's why we get, pills. Pilling is it's one of my things that it's a real pet peeve of mine with clothing, because there's a lot of reasons for pilling, but a lot of that is really, it's mechanical action. And so what happens is that the clothing is basically, when you're putting it through the washing machine, it's being damaged as part of the cleaning process. And so you actually get sort of little microfibrils and things breaking off the fibers. And it doesn't matter whether it's a synthetic fiber or a natural fiber, you're still going to have some of that sort of damage, basically, and little tiny microfibrils sort of breaking off the fibers.
So is the intensity of the agitation different whether it is a front loader or top loader? I mean, you hear a lot about front loaders being more economical in terms of use of water, but is it kind of on the clothes? Are there different soap detergents that are worse or kinder in terms of the damage it's causing to the fabric? Or does that also depend on what the textile actually is or what the fabric actually is?
It's really all of those things. So personally, I only use a front loader. I don't want to use a top loader anymore because of that central agitator. My feeling is that it actually does cause more damage to clothing. It's great if you're washing a lot of really, really dirty things, but a lot of us, I don't think unless you're working on a farm and you have a lot of really heavily soiled garments that you're putting into your washing machine, that you might need that sort of central agitator. Like for myself, I'm putting things in the wash maybe that, and this is going to sound really bad, probably maybe don't need to be laundered. Is it, are you washing things because they actually have dirt on them or some sort of particulate matter, or are you washing things because you think, oh, I've worn that to the gym a couple times and it might be a bit stinky, or, is it more of an odor thing than an actual dirt? And so that brings up a lot of questions around, are we overwashing our clothes? Are we being too health and hygiene conscious? Which are, that's a very cultural thing as well. So this is a conversation that, it's not just about clothing, it's about your health and hygiene and all of those sorts of things that go in with that sort of discussion. But yes, certainly you can, I know there's a study that suggests that using a liquid detergent reduces the number of microfibers that are released. And after reading that paper, I've switched to liquid detergent. And which, again, in my mind, it does make sense, because if you think about using a powder detergent, the powder is kind of abrasive. Exactly. And so you would have more of that sort of mechanical abrasive action on your clothing that might contribute to release of microfibers. It's
like toothpaste that has bicarb soda. They say it's better, but actually it's more aggressive on your gums and your teeth. So it's that same kind of concept of powder versus
exactly.
With liquid. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we're kind of just talking about physics here.
Yeah.
And now going back to the problem of microfibers or microplastic being released, is there not, I guess that's what the definition is, micro, but particular filters that can catch these microplastics, is that something that's been worked on in the industry, or is that something we just got to give up and accept because they are micro, they are so small that we can't really capture them? Is that such a thing?
Absolutely. There's been a few different companies that have sort of started developing solutions. So I think one of the main ones is called the Guppy bag, and that's actually a bag that you can put your clothes in and then put it in the washing machine, and the bag actually catches the microfibers in the bag. And I do believe that you can actually get filters that you can put on your washing machine as well, like the outlet for the water, that helps to catch those microfibers. But again, this is really all coming down to us as consumers and putting responsibility on us to try and address these very widespread problems, which, obviously there aren't a lot of better solutions at this stage, but it's one of the things that I question really myself is what is the responsibility of us as consumers versus the producers of, whether it's, where does the responsibility lie in terms of solving these problems and trying to mitigate the effects?
That's
but
right.
Certainly there are things you can do as a consumer. They're small, but certainly, doing something small, I think, is definitely better than doing nothing. But again, if we want to see a really, a huge shift in sort of actually trying to solve some of these problems, I think that's going to take more than just us as an average consumer.
It's like the old problem of CFCs, old refrigerators and air conditioning units that used to emit those nasty chemicals that depleted our ozone hole, that had to come from the industry because there's nothing we could do. So it's kind of a
responsible stewardship of waste, basically. Like if these companies were more responsible about their products at the end of the life, I'm sure that they would change their actions and production methods. But until there's that incentive
at the moment,
to do so.
When you go shopping for whiteware, so let's say a washing machine, there's now those stickers that show you how economical it is in terms of water usage or power usage, whether it's a fridge and so on. Perhaps that's somewhere down the line where now it's going to say how protective it is or how efficient it is in terms of capturing all those extra elements that we don't want to actually put into our waterways. So, yeah, interesting. Now, another thing that's really struck me of interest here is when you said that the most amount of energy that's consumed in terms of a garment is during its wear, during its use. But surely some fabrics or, whatever the correct term is, whether it's a textile or however, you refer to them, surely some of them, whether they are fossil fuel driven or whether it's coming from, let's say, use the example of leather, so, the animal grazing on the land, surely there are some that have to be consuming more energy in that whole production process before we actually wear and wash it almost every day.
There are, certainly. I mean, there are differences, but it's a bit like there's no black and white, like especially in my mind. And I guess this is probably the thing that's frustrating for my students as well when I talk to them, is that there's no one best option. So I'm not going to say, yes, we should all be buying this particular fiber or this particular fabric, because there's just so many different nuances in terms of their impact. And also, if I said, we should all switch and be only wearing organic cotton, well, there's simply not enough land to be growing organic cotton for everybody to be wearing organic cotton. Especially if you sort of look at the amount of land that's being used for grazing of, say, animals. And, as the global population continues to grow, are we going to be spending, it's using all of this land to be growing fibers for clothing, or are we going to be using that land to be growing food for people? And if people are hungry, obviously you're going to be going, well, we're going to prioritize using our land for food, not for fibers for clothing. So, and those are the sorts of questions and decisions I think that will be probably starting to be made in coming sort of decades as the population does sort of, as long as we see it continue to grow at the rate that it's growing, because there just isn't enough land to be growing. We can't all be wearing organic cotton. There just isn't enough land.
Yeah, or water.
Or water, exactly. And like when we're talking about the washing, there's some really great research that actually was done at the University of Otago a bit before me, looking at odor in clothing. And certainly polyester is the stinkiest. Like polyester, it does smell. if we all think about us, people that go to the gym, you're wearing a lot of polyester t-shirts, you're getting sweaty. They do stink. You do kind of have to wash them quite frequently. Whereas if you look at something like merino wool, it actually is not as stinky. The research is there to back up those claims about wool and odor. And it's very interesting because it actually has nothing, at least as of yet, there's no link between odor and bacterial populations on the fabric, which is very interesting. So people that are out there spending lots of money on antibacterial fabrics, there's actually, as far as I'm aware, in terms of the research to this point, there's still no link between bacteria on the fabric and odor, which is very interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's a number of reasons that could be, but so far I haven't seen the research that suggests the link between bacteria and odor. It actually is the type of fiber, with polyester being the stinkiest and wool being the least stinky.
I can certainly attest to that, because spending many hours trail running, and I used to wear wool, and now it's all polyprops, and it's got to go in that wash, and it's got to be washed well. But the interesting thing, we talk about odor, and odor is generally one of the reasons we probably wash more than we need. You give it a quick sniff test, no, that's going in the wash. But when we go back to the early conversation about pilling, does that not change then the argument in terms of what kind of fabric could be better? Because wool, I find you wear a woolen jumper or something, and it's always pilling. There's always a fiber coming off just there. Whereas if you're buying, I'm talking about a better quality polyester legging or top, maybe I don't notice it, but does it pill as easily? Does it last as well?
And those are really important questions to be asking. A lot of this comes down to the way that the fabrics are made. So there's a couple different ways that pills are formed, and some of it has to do with the strength of the fiber. So polyester is a very strong fiber, and generally polyester it's extruded as a filament, so it's one long continuous fiber. Whereas wool is a little bit weaker as a fiber, and it's a shorter fiber because it's coming from an animal, so it's not a continuous filament. So basically what happens is when you're twisting these fibers into yarn, because the polyester is long, very, very long fibers, you don't have to twist it as much. And because they're quite long and they're quite strong, they're less likely to sort of come out of the yarn and escape. Whereas wool, being a little bit shorter, if you don't twist it really, really highly, the fibers aren't sort of stuck together as well. And so they're more likely to kind of come out of the yarn and form pills. And basically when you're seeing pills, to me, a lot of times it has to do with the yarn twist, especially. So when I say yarn twist, that's how many twists are twisting those fibers together and basically holding them together using friction. Again, we're talking about physics of fibers here. And what happens is that as consumers, a lot of consumers really like soft, fuzzy fabrics. They feel nice. They're nice against the skin. Those soft, fuzzy fabrics are soft and fuzzy because the yarns are not twisted together very well. And so because they're soft and fuzzy, the fibers are much more likely to come out and pill. So I think for a lot of manufacturers, they know that consumers like these sort of what we call a hand feel. So it's a soft hand feel. The surface is kind of soft and fuzzy. Especially think about jumpers and socks and things. They feel really nice because the fibers are not twisted together very, very tightly. So if you sort of think about like jumpers and things from like the 70s and 80s, you think about them being really stiff and kind of hard, and they don't feel very nice, but they were very durable.
And they still last around. Yeah.
They're still around. They're still in the vintage shops, and that is because those fibers and yarns and things were they were a little bit coarser. They're probably twisted together quite strongly. They do kind of they don't feel as nice. The fabrics are a little bit harsher. They kind of are crunchy, but they're still around, so they're still really durable. So it's really you're really making these choices between something that's very soft and feels nice and it's nice to wear, and durability, in my mind. And a lot of manufacturers now, I think, are really moving towards those fabrics that are soft. And a little bit, you see this in terms of clothing, like t-shirts and things getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And I feel like manufacturers feel like that's a desire coming from the consumer for softer and thinner fabrics. But when we are moving towards these softer and thinner fabrics, we're losing durability. And you sort of wonder at what point are consumers going to continue to want to buy the sort of the $10 t-shirt. It's soft and thin, but then it falls apart after a couple of wears versus slightly something more expensive. The fabric is more expensive to make, but it's more durable. It's, it's a thicker fabric. It's not as soft, but the consumer can wear that item for years and years and years and continue to wash it and wear it and all those sorts of things.
But that's exacerbated by the fast fashion world we live in now. So to pay $10 for a funky looking t-shirt, well, not me personally, but a person is okay, because then in 6 months, great, I've got to buy a new one and I want a new color now because that's the in thing, or a different design. So there's kind of a lot of other factors feeding this as well. I presume these fibres that are not twisted and as much, and not produced or these garments are not produced in a as much intensive process, are not as expensive either. So cheaper to manufacture, sell it cheaper, and then therefore people are more loath to pay and get more garments. So it's not helping in terms of that whole. It goes back to your earlier thing about knowing how to sew. I mean, that's the way of the future. Upcycling and repairing what you have and keeping what you have. So there's a lot of other factors I think that's contributing to that, and of course garments that aren't lasting more are ending up in landfill as well.
Exactly. It's all exasperating, and I guess this is kind of one of my earlier points, which is that as consumers, I feel like there's a real lack of knowledge. People don't know how to sew anymore. So if a button or something falls off, the shirt goes to the op shop, or hopefully not. It might just go in the bin because people don't know how to sew on buttons anymore. And so, being able to repair your clothing is a real skill, and it allows you to wear your clothes for a lot longer. You can tailor things, that's a really useful skill. Not a lot of people have that anymore. People don't understand as much about laundering and washing. So, if I'm just chuck everything into the wash and I don't care what colors are being mixed, and I'm not paying attention to what detergent I'm using, or I'm not putting delicate items in a delicate bag, those items are going to wear out more quickly, and they're going to end up, in landfill or in the rubbish, or, wherever it might be. So it's, I feel like it's kind of, and again, it's not the consumer's fault that they don't have this knowledge. It's a cultural shift.
Yeah.
So
I remember that, I don't know if you've seen The War on Waste, but there was a really impactful scene where Craig Rewcastle was standing in the middle of Sydney with this huge pile of clothing, and they calculated that 6,000 kilograms of clothes get chucked out every 10 minutes by Aussies, which is just massive. But we do have these larger companies now like H&M and Nike that, they're promoting their sustainability goals, and they're saying that they're in favour of circular economic models. Is this the way that industry needs to be moving? Is it greenwashing? Are we kind of like falling for it here? What's the solution, do you think?
My personal belief is that the industry is moving towards greener, sort of greener and more sustainable production, definitely. And there's a lot of brands that are actually working in this area, and it's very interesting because I don't feel like they're not communicating it to their customers. And part of that, I think, is fear, because they're worried that if they start to say we're trying to do this, we're trying to be more sustainable. I would think that they feel like people will be like, oh, well, you're not doing it perfectly yet, and so they're going to actually get negative feedback. And when in fact we should be commending them for at least starting on the journey and taking baby steps, because it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, you can't shift an industry to be completely sort of sustainable overnight. It's going to be a slow process. And so I know that there are brands out there that are actually taking a lot of steps, but they're not communicating that with their customer yet. And my personal feeling is that any brand that isn't engaging on this journey is not going to be around in the future.
But what does sustainability in the industry actually mean? So you've got companies like Adidas who have been communicating about all their shoes at some point will be made from recycled plastic. And we're seeing that with outdoor brands, bags. This is made from 5 bottles or from 20 bottles and so on. Is that actually a sustainable model? Is that taking plastic, having to break that down into a manner that you can then repurpose and reuse to create a garment? Is that actually, from an energy point of view, from a whole processing point of view, is that actually helping? Or is that creating a new problem?
I actually think that it's helping. I mean, I don't think the systems are perfect, and especially in New Zealand and Australia, we don't really have yet the infrastructure to be doing these sort of take back and collecting and recycling. But I think it's really encouraging that some of these big companies like Nike and Adidas are starting to have this conversation. And I think it would be wonderful to be able to buy a pair of Nike runners and then be able to send them back to Nike and ensure that they get made into another pair of shoes or some other sort of valuable product. Because again, it seems like in terms of local governments, we're not seeing that policy and infrastructure coming from sort of, the government isn't doing it. And so it's where does that responsibility lie? Traditionally it's been falling on the consumers. Now we're seeing brands start to take more of that responsibility on, which is great. But I think it would be even better if we were seeing it from a higher level again, a bit like the CFCs. Why were we able to make such quick action, or why we're able to make such change on CFCs, not just from one country, but on a global stance? Whereas we're dealing with a lot of other problems, which I think are probably just as large as CFCs, but it kind of, I don't know if it's because people are not able to see microplastics because it's so small and we don't understand the scale of the problem, or it's kind of we don't know exactly what the negative effects are. I mean, we know that there's negative effects on sort of microorganisms and aquatic life for sure, but we don't actually know necessarily what the effects of microplastics on humans are, or we haven't seen them yet. I mean, I'm not 100% sure what they are yet, but I'm assuming that there are some, and we just haven't seen it yet. So,
and what about the supposed? I say supposed because I don't know, hence why I'm asking. But the claims of even more sustainable fibres, like say bamboo, now seems to be the latest trend. But there's all sorts of others. I mean, hemp and I mean we've had linen and cotton that have been around for a very long time, but bamboo seems to be the latest. And then when there's claims of this is the way forward, it's this sustainable, it's all those keywords. Again, if we were recording this visually, our listeners would actually see the reaction on your face when I said that.
Oh, bamboo. Oh, bamboo is my favorite. I won't make my terrible dad joke that I make for my
students. Please do. Or use it as the outtake.
Yeah, it's like, if you're buying bamboo, you've been bamboozled.
Boom, boom.
That's bad.
There we go.
It's really bad. My students are sick of hearing that one. So bamboo has been a really successful marketing ploy as being sustainable. If you're buying something that's marketed as bamboo microfiber, you're just buying viscose. So viscose is probably one of the earliest, it's not a true synthetic, it's called a semi-synthetic fiber, because it is produced, you can make viscose out of anything cellulose. Traditionally, viscose is made out of wood pulp, which is why viscose is traditionally has not been sustainable, because a lot of companies were basically cutting down old growth forest and turning the wood into wood pulp, the same as you would start the paper making process, but they're basically dissolving the wood, creating basically just cellulose, and then they're able to extrude that cellulose as fiber. So it's called a semi-synthetic. It's any type of cellulose can be dissolved and extruded as fiber.
I always thought it was just another fancy word for polyester, but okay, so
it's
very different.
Yeah. So if you see something rayon and viscose, those are the two main types of sort of generic terms that you would see on a label.
Yeah.
Tencel is the same, except Tencel is only made by Lenzing, is the company that owns the IP around that. And Tencel is the rayon and viscose process, but they're able to recover all the solvent, or like 99.9% of the solvent that they're using to dissolve the cellulose. And Lenzing also, I believe that they sustainably manage their forests, so they're not sort of cutting down old growth trees and making it into Tencel or lyocell. But it's basically the same fiber, but it's a more sustainable process.
What about at the end of it? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. So when you see bamboo, basically it probably has come from bamboo as the source of the cellulose, but it's still been put through the same rayon and viscose making process. And it doesn't have, I mean, after it goes through that process, it's not going to have any inherent antibacterial properties or whatever they're marketing it as bamboo. It is still just rayon or viscose. It's just come from bamboo as the feedstock.
So is it sustainable because bamboo supposedly needs less water, it grows really fast, easy to replenish? So is that really where that claim is coming from? But the production of a viscose fiber, that still sounds to me very energy intensive. So it's a whole manufacturing process.
It is. And there's also, I mean, certainly it's better to grow bamboo than it is to be cutting down old growth forest. But when you have giant plantations of bamboo, you also start to have issues around, you basically have monocultures, you have lack of biodiversity.
Yeah.
So it's really, again, it's about making those tough choices as a consumer. I mean, I think if you like bamboo, just it's about having the consumer having the knowledge to know that this is still just viscose or rayon. It's probably come from a bamboo feedstock, and perhaps it's better than an old growth forest, but is it better than, say, a sustainably managed forest? I don't know. But again, as consumers, we don't have that sort of information to make these sorts of choices. That's not on the swing tag. It's not on the label. We just don't know.
Yeah. What about at the end of its life, though? So once the garment's chucked out and is in landfill, does it break down properly, or with all of the processes that it had to go through to actually be created, does that kind of hinder the biodegradableness of it?
Well, my argument would be that nothing in landfill is breaking down because of the types of conditions that are in the landfill.
So if you put a t-shirt in a hole in the garden, would that break down, basically?
It would, but do you want the dyes and the other one of 8,000 different textile chemical auxiliaries in there breaking down and being in your garden as well and leaching into wastewater?
Absolutely. Yeah. On that point, let's talk about jeans and that really interesting project that you were involved in when you were at Deakin, because jeans are quite water intensive with all the dyes and the effluent from that. Could you tell us a little bit about that circular denim project that you were involved in?
Absolutely. So we were actually taking old jeans, and we were essentially making them into a really fine powder. And the powder that was resulting from the jeans was blue in color. So we were using that powder as a pigment and then basically coating and recoloring new jeans through a pigmentation process. So pigments are different from dyes. Dyes are chemically bonding with the fiber. Whereas pigments are a colored particle that you actually have to basically glue or adhere to the surface of the fabric. And both are used commonly in textile production. But basically we were making a kind of a pigment from old denim jeans.
That's very cool. Because I read somewhere, please correct me if I'm wrong, but to color a pair of jeans, usually you need to use about 200 litres of water. And with the way you're doing it, no need,
exactly. We were just using it. We were making this sort of a coating. I would call it a coating. We were coating old new jeans with the old jeans. Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely cuts down on the water used in the dyeing process.
Yeah, very cool. We need more of these kind of innovations in the fashion industry that can be scalable.
Well, absolutely. And I know and I don't want to quote the company because there's a couple different really amazing, quite sustainable denim companies in Australia who are doing a lot of really wonderful work in terms of, ethical production and sourcing. And I forget who it is that says that we shouldn't be washing our denim at all. We should just be putting our jeans in the freezer.
In the freezer.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and that's, and there's a lot of people that sort of ascribe to that notion of, we shouldn't be washing jeans at all, which is, in terms of cutting down the energy production. And it really does happen in the garments sort of use phase is what I'm calling it. So if you're putting them in the freezer instead of putting them in the washing machine, you're not releasing any microfibers, and you're absolutely cutting down on the water that's being used. So I think that's a great innovation.
I just don't know. I mean,
you don't want jeans in your freezer, Ben?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it's jeans, then why not your cotton t-shirts and your jumpers, and then you end up buying a bigger deep freezer to put all your clothes in, and
then you're using energy, and it really is that it's just about trying to make more informed choices. And again, as consumers, I feel like, and I'm a scientist as well, so I'm like, I want all the information, and the information isn't quite all out there yet. I mean, even though I work in research and I have access to a lot of information, even for myself, I feel like we don't quite have the complete understanding of the picture yet in order to make the best choices.
Yeah.
We're starting to get that information, but we don't have everything yet.
Because it's there's so many aspects to it. If you look at
the wicked problem.
Yeah, there's leather, wool, silk that's been around for centuries, but then there's questions about the ethical side of things in terms of how animals are treated, etc., and also especially when it comes to leather, in many respects, the impact it has on the land, water, and so on. And then you go to things like cotton, where there's the argument of your cotton versus your general cotton versus organic cotton, and then you've got all these other natural, well, now whether this viscous apparently now, so bamboo and hemp and so on, versus the synthetics, your polyesters, your lycra, that is fossil fuel driven. So each one takes a different journey. Well, we want to definitely reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, but we also want to reduce our impact on the land in terms of water consumption, and then the impact on the water in return. We want quality, but we want comfort. How do we make a choice? How do we, I'm pretty stoked as well. I think, in the past, sometimes we get caught up in fashion and we're buying more than we need. So now I do want to make a more conscious, not necessarily have to pay more money, but I'm prepared to pay more money if that garment's going to stick around for longer. But I'm still faced with, okay, this is made with recycled bottles. Okay, so I'm doing good. I'm helping solve a particular problem, but am I actually exacerbating another problem? Or do I, how do I make a decision? How do I choose make a better choice here?
And that's a really good question. I think that's a question many of us are asking ourselves, even, myself working in the fashion industry, and obviously being a person who's always liked to engage in fashion. How do you make a better choice? And it's very interesting that you bring up hemp as well, which is something that I'm very interested in. But because of the nature of hemp, only certain places are growing it. It's very hard to do research on it. I think that's a fiber with a lot of potential that has some barriers to overcome around, because of the nature of the plant and everything. But hopefully we'll see more hemp in the future, especially in America, as things are starting to become more legal there. We'll hopefully see more hemp grown, because I think that could be a nice alternative. So these sort of new fibers that perhaps in the past we've not seen as much of, hopefully we'll see more of those. But certainly for myself, obviously the best choice is not to buy anything new if you can avoid it. So if you don't need it, don't buy it. I mean, again, it's, fashion is I think it's very normal for us to want to engage in fashion as humans. We need to wear clothes. You can't say, oh, I'm not going to buy anything for the rest of my life. That's not very feasible. But, if you can avoid buying it, obviously that's the best choice. But you don't want to say we want to take down the fashion industry either. Obviously, this is the industry that I work with. So we still want to have a fashion industry, but if we all stop buying stuff, that affects the industry and workers, and it's a whole host of problems. Buying secondhand if you can, certainly. If you don't need it, don't buy it. But if you do need it, if you can buy it secondhand, certainly that's a great option. Or renting it. If you are going to buy it, then I guess, trying to do a bit of research and find, buying from a company that does have some ethical or sustainable values that you align with, and then using it for as long as possible. If something does happen, if it gets a hole or a tear or whatever, then trying to repair it and continue to use it as long as possible. And then at the end of its life, if you don't want it anymore, can you give it to a friend? Can you donate it? Can you still keep it in the system to be used for as much, as long as it possibly can be, or turned into something else, upcycled or recycled? The last thing we want to be doing is putting these textiles in landfill, especially things that are, are perfectly good still. You don't want to wear something once and then throw it in the landfill. To me, that's just an absolute waste of resources. So we want to try and hang on to these resources as much as possible. But it is a really difficult question.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners will know, though, that for the past probably 9 years, and now it's part of what we do here at the Lentil Intervention, but we do an appeal, have done an appeal, and it's soon going to be more of a continual thing, but we do collect sports shoes and sports gear and donate that to the higher deprivation, low income communities and schools. So that is a way of contributing and ensuring there's continuity with the product rather than going straight into landfill. So that is something that we're trying to be conscious of. Now, we've been talking a lot about textiles and fashion, but what some of us might forget is that fabrics and so on is actually everywhere else. I mean, I think all three of us are sitting on a chair that's probably got some kind of fabric. It's in homes, it's transport on trains and planes and cars.
Tea bags.
And tea bags. Now, I know you've spoken about this before, but that was fascinating, is the amount of microparticles and nanoparticles that's released from a single cup of tea if you're using a tea bag.
There was a paper that was published, and it was specifically looking at those the kind of fancy pyramid bags in particular. Like your sort of old school tea bags, I don't think, the ones that are sort of made of paper don't release as many microfibers. It's really those fancy little pyramid, sort of like higher end tea bags that I think release, it was like 70,000 microfibers in a single cup of tea or nano. It was quite scary, actually. Yeah, and after reading that paper, I was like, I'm not going to be buying any more of those pyramid tea bags. I'm a huge consumer of tea, and now I've been doing in the last year, especially working from home, I drink a lot of loose leaf tea now and just avoid the tea bags altogether. But textiles are all around us, especially you think of those blue chucks, those sort of cleaning cloths, and now in the beauty industry, think of all the sort of like, face wipes and face masks and all of these kind of disposable baby wipes, all of these sorts of things that are really prevalent through our lives. And a lot of it is around convenience, and a lot of it also is around health and hygiene. And certainly in the last year, the disposable masks. Yeah. I mean, you guys are in New Zealand, so maybe you haven't quite seen as many. I mean, here in Melbourne,
I'm seeing it just on a little bushwalk.
Exactly, they're just everywhere now. Those disposable masks. Yeah. And so a lot of it is around health and safety, like the amount of textile waste that comes out of a hospital every day. Nurses switching gowns between patients, bedding, all of those really very, important health and safety items, basically is a biohazard. So what do you do with it? So there's just this, when we talk about textile waste, it goes so far beyond fashion. Carpets, industrial carpets for offices and buildings are one of the biggest contributors of textile waste to landfills.
And the retail industry as well. I mean, that's the industry I've worked in for years, doing a lot of corporate retail rebrands and refurbishments and so on. And it's amazing. I don't know if your time when you were studying here in New Zealand, but the National Bank, which is a bank that out of Lloyd's, well, owned by Lloyd's and then got taken over by ANZ. But in the era of the National Bank, their carpets and their retail branches were woolen carpets. And because of the rebrand, you had to go in and change the look and feel, including the carpet. And you were taking out 20-year-old carpet that still looked brand new and putting in this cheap synthetic carpet tiles that after 3 years just looked horrible. So again, this higher turnover of, needing to replace. And yeah, I can imagine. I mean, when you're doing corporate fit outs, commercial buildings, the amount of carpets that'll come out of that.
Oh, exactly. And the other thing that really is kind of one of my latest sort of little pet peeves is t-shirts for events, like single one-off use t-shirts or t-shirts for brand. I don't know.
I'm covering up my t-shirt right now. I am wearing a 50% cotton, 50% polyester event t-shirt, which I honestly thought I was getting 100% cotton. And then when I found it was a mix, but then I don't know, is it better or not? So yeah, about 100% right. Yep, events. Yep.
The branding and it's not just, it's everyone has these sort of one-off t-shirts to, whether you're using it to signify people working at the event or, and there's brands that do it as well. If they're doing promotions, there's the t-shirt with the latest promotion of whatever it is. I don't want to point out any brands. I don't want anyone to get
we're all
upset
guilty.
with me, but
we're all guilty.
It's those sorts of things that in the past have been very much it's been very normal, and now I think it's good for us to start to just rethink them a little bit and say, do we really need this? Is there something else? Is there another way that we can convey this information that perhaps is less likely to end up in the bin, or is I don't know. I just
there is an event company that it's just popped into my head now. They've I think they are aligned with it's out of the UK, a charity organisation. I think they're charity called Tees for Trees. So when you enter an event, you have the option of opting out of getting an event T-shirt, ticking the box, and instead the money they would have used to purchase that T-shirt to give to you will go to that organisation to plant a tree. So there is a little bit of awareness around that. And to be fair, I personally do benefit from these event T-shirts because some event organisers I'm aligned to, their leftover merchandise they give to me to donate to the schools. Again, it's kind of dealing with one problem rather than let's rather avoid it in the beginning, like you say, rather than, we've got a weekend away, let's make some T-shirts too, and then it ends up in the bin, like you say. So yeah, it's that fast fashion, high consumerism approach in terms of, well, is there actually a bigger purpose to what you're spending your money in and acquiring?
But I mean, all of these kind of, I feel they're all part of a larger conversation around sort of shifts in values and things that we're seeing in a sort of a cultural change and things happening in society. And part of that could be that, I live in Melbourne, I work in a university, and I'm sort of surrounded by very much like-minded people. But I think it's good to see people start to ask these questions and just have these conversations and not be taking them for granted anymore. And that I feel like for me, that's a good way that, the information is being disseminated. Because,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, again, I'm very biased. I work in a university, but I think anytime we can increase our knowledge and understanding and the more information we have, the better choices we're able to make.
Yeah, perfect. And I think it is slowly filtering through. I know personally more people that are using that Good On You app, and they're looking at that Baptist World Aid ethical fashion report each year when it comes out. So we're getting there. It just would be great if we could get there a little quicker.
Exactly. And it is, for me, it really is a challenge in terms of infrastructure. The industry in the past, it's just been business as usual for many, many years now. And suddenly consumers and brands are wanting quite a rapid change. And certainly changes are happening. A lot more manufacturers are offering sustainable fabrics. That there's definitely really been a shift in terms of for designers and brands and makers that want to source more sustainable fabrics. They have many more options now than they did even 5 years ago. And I think we'll just continue to see that to grow, which is wonderful. But, it's also doing that consumer education part of the piece as well.
Yeah. And unsubscribing from all those sale emails that
Yep.
land in your inbox.
Exactly.
So if we were to put you on the spot and ask, what do you think would be a good all-round option in terms of from your leather wools to your cottons to your synthetics and so on? If there was one fabric that kind of poked its head up above the rest, what do you think would be a good all-round, if there is such a thing, in terms of the production, the energy consumption, to its wear, durability, to the polluting sort of aspect on the other side of that?
I honestly don't know. And I'm sorry, that's not a cop-out. Literally, in my mind, there
Yeah.
is no one best answer.
It just shows how...
Yeah, every single fabric, every single fiber there's an advantage and a disadvantage in terms of either its production or its use or its energy consumption. Like, I love linen, but then you have to iron it, and so that's another level,
Yeah.
That's energy production.
Yeah.
And wool is great, but if you're a vegan, you're not going to wear wool. And it does, there's a lot of water that's used in the growing of the wool and the dyeing and the process and the cleaning of wool. But if you buy wool, then you can wear it and wear it and wear it. And you don't have to wash it as often, which is great. And really high quality wool products will last you for years, which I love.
Yeah. I've still got tops that I don't buy any more animal-based products, but I've still got icebreaker tops that I've had for over 10 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I love Tencel as well. I think Tencel is great, but sometimes it can be hard to find Tencel items, and sometimes they're not as durable. So it's really, you're really making those trade-offs, which is really challenging.
So it comes down to that particular company manufacturing that garment. So there could be organic cotton versus another one doing organic cotton, but there's ethical issues with the one, or the way they manufacture, or the quality. It just comes down to the quality in terms of the, what do you call it, the denier, the density of the, or the thickness of the...
Exactly, the thickness of the fabric.
Yeah.
So I think, as a consumer, there's probably no one best option. So I would say, do research into your brand. And also, if you're concerned, if a brand, if there's a brand that you love and they're not communicating anything about their sustainability or their production, email the brand, and that's how they will know then that you as their consumer is interested and are hoping that they are engaging with these issues. And that's how we can see brands start to change as well, when they're getting lots of emails from their consumers going, how sustainably sourced are your fabrics, or are you producing in an ethical way, or, having these conversations. That puts pressure on those brands to say, oh, I actually need to start engaging in these issues. Or they can be, we're already on this journey, but we just haven't been communicating to you yet because we don't feel like we're at a position where we feel comfortable communicating with you, because we're still just sort of taking baby steps, but at least they're engaging. So
yeah. I think that's a very important point. Make some noise. Don't just vote with your wallet, but actually make some noise so people know that you are interested in this issue.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And just a note on our inability for most of us to not know how to sew, and this is both in New Zealand and Australia. There's a lot of wonderful little self-owned businesses and retail strips where little go up the stairs, out the back, and there's someone that repairs garments and bags and shoes and so on, and it costs as little as $10 to redo a hem or I mean, I've taken stuff where seam is split, but I love the top. And so, like you say, there's other ways of keeping our garments. There's people that will do it for us, and it's inexpensive.
Absolutely. And it's great. It's, you're supporting your local small business as well. And certainly, things like a split seam, that's a very easy fix, and that's something, if the seam splits or the hem falls down on your trousers, those things can be fixed very, very quickly. They're very simple repairs. So it's about, finding your local tailor.
Dr. Rebecca van Amber, this has been a really enlightening conversation, very different to our last few guests where it's been very doom and gloom. And but, I think what's important to note is that the way we consume, and this is a theme that's becoming more and more apparent, is having a tremendous impact on our planet, in terms of the resources we need to derive to create a garment, to the way we I was going to say consume, we're not eating it, but the way we're using it, washing it, and looking after, and what we do at the end of its life cycle. So, this has been a very valuable lesson, that it's not just about the big ticket items. It's even every day what we're sitting in right now and wearing, the decisions we can make in terms of the garments we're purchasing. We can take action by, like you say, even reaching out to some of these companies, and then you have an ethical connection perhaps to that company, because you want to support the good work they're doing. So thank you so much for shedding such a insight into a fascinating topic that no one really knows about, other than maybe the label on the inside of the garment. Still don't know what that means. So thank you so much. It's really nice to have conversations like this, very different but still very valuable. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been my pleasure. Again, I know that my knowledge is very, I hate to use the word niche. It's not a lot of people that know a lot about fabric. So it's wonderful to come and try and help communicate that, and hopefully not overwhelm with the science. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.